Greetings, adventurers. You're listening to The Quiet Journeys of Professor Atwood with me, Professor Atwood. I'm glad you're here, and I can't wait to tell you about my latest journey. Don't worry, it's a safe space. I'll handle all the danger for you. I designed these stories to help you relax, chill anxiety, and go to sleep. Maybe they'll even put a smile on your face, even if it's a sleepy smile. So please, settle in, relax, and prepare to quietly drift off with me to parts known, unknown, and even some places in between. Comfortable? Very well. Let's get underway. Good evening, adventurers. I hope you're doing well. I also hope you're all cozy and settled in, because tonight I'm going to tell you about our much-anticipated Mars landing. But first, there was that pesky meteor storm that seemed to be following us. We had to deal with that before we could land, and I'll get to how we did it in a moment. Now, as you remember from last time, we had all of our briefings and went over the mission to find the missing Mars ship, the John Carter, and her crew. My son was part of that crew, and I was eager to find him. We also went over terraforming Mars and how the Martians were indeed open to it if we could come up with an equitable agreement. But then there was also the matter of the mysterious surface ruins and the appearance of my friend Tom the Futurist on Mars. So there were a lot of pieces that I knew would only fit together once we got there. We were only a day away when an unexpected meteor storm complicated things considerably. And despite Flight Commander Barry's impeccable flying skills, we could not escape it. It was following us. And I will tell you all about that and an unusual crew discovery in a moment. But first, I need to tell you about a few things. First of all, I wanted to say I hope you liked the soundscape Bradley presented 2 episodes ago. We were exploring even more ways to help you chill out, relax, and sleep. And we have more interesting things planned on that front as well. I will keep you posted, adventurers, so please, stay tuned. Now, something new I wanted to mention, as our White Cat Entertainment colleague Chris Mancini has his new graphic novel, Long Ago and Far Away 2, over at Kickstarter. You can just go to Kickstarter and search for it, or go to whitecatentertainment.com and click through from the homepage. It's a fantasy comedy, kind of like a mix between Game of Thrones and Clerks. It's a direct sequel to Long Ago and Far Away, and here's what it's about. I'll read what Chris gave me. Hold on. Okay, as a result of our hero Jason's adventure with the Witch Queen, he now has a son, and since time passes differently in Elvenwood, the son, Lord Stone, is about 20 years older than Jason. Lord Stone also seems to have the entire sect of Northern Necromancers after him due to him stealing their sacred blood dagger for, well, mead money. They are powerful, quite angry, and are laying waste to Elvenwood to get to him, raising the dead as they go. Nexus could not protect him, so she sent him to Jason in his world to save his life. Now Jason has to return once again to Elvenwood to deal with the deadly Northern Necromancers, a horde of undead, coveted artifacts, and keeping an alliance with the elves and the Witch Queen intact. He has to do this while dealing with the most difficult adventure of all, fatherhood. Now, I've seen some of it already, and it is exciting and fun, so please, don't miss it. It's a limited time. It's going to end soon, so please go over to Kickstarter and support the project. It is live now, and you can pledge, and the sooner the better. The sooner they can get to the goal, the better. You can also get caught up, as Volume 1 will also be available as well as some other add-ons, I believe they're called. And I know it's ironic to say this, but please, don't sleep on it, as the campaign ends October 22nd, and it's all or nothing, so we need your support ASAP. Thank you, adventurers. All right, now let's get back to the story. Now, I will say, I've experienced a lot of things, but being chased by a meteor storm just outside of Mars' orbit was something new, for sure. I had a feeling the crew felt the same way. Barry was again altering our course to no avail, but the storm, it just kept following us. There had to be an explanation, but for now it was just one more mystery being thrown on top of the Mars mystery pile that seemed to be growing the closer we got to our destination. Now, our Whipple shield was holding, but it would not be enough. I would need to employ stronger countermeasures for us to get out of this one. Fortunately, the Journeyman was equipped with multiple systems for just this type of emergency. Well, maybe not this specific type, but you never think a meteor storm is going to take things personally. So what we had on board would simply have to do. Now, as I said before, a Whipple shield was holding, along with the sound dampening materials, so the meteors that did manage to strike the hull sounded more like a gentle rain than anything menacing, and I think that helped keep everyone calm. I had been through many storms, as you know, and even though we were in space, it did feel similar. I felt safe and insulated with the storm on the outside. The gentle pattering of the meteors sounded against the hull as I just took a moment to reflect on the similarities. I quieted my mind, meditated on the sound, and began thinking of solutions. And sometimes, the most direct solution is the most practical. If you can't go around something, you're gonna have to go through it. Barry seemed to agree, and had already called me for authorization. Now, as you can imagine, I'm not a big fan of the militarization of space, but, I'm not in charge of such things. But when you're face to face with a meteor swarm that's following you, there's nothing to be done for it except reach for your energy weapon array, which is a last resort. I said before the Journeyman had countermeasures such as energy weapons, but now, they weren't for battling aliens, which would of course be the fanciful interpretation. They were more defensive for normally the non-following meteor storms, but also for other space debris that can't be avoided. Honestly, there are more satellites up here than anyone thinks, and they can get crowded, as they're often not well made, veer off course unexpectedly, or even get stuck in a non-decaying orbit long after they have stopped functioning. But there's other debris as well, and sometimes I've even had a hard time identifying what it is. So there are plenty of mysteries up here in space. But, well, our plate was quite full right now, so there was no sense in looking for more. Still, the militarization of space has an interesting history. The main targets in space are pretty much satellites, and it's been that way for decades. So the main development of space weapons has pretty much been anti-satellite weapons, or ASATs. They are space weapons designed to incapacitate or destroy satellites for strategic or tactical purposes. Now, obviously, this creates even more space debris, and the whole course of action has been short-sighted from the beginning, but again, it's paranoid world governments we're talking about here. Although no ASAT system has yet been utilized in warfare, a few countries, China, India, Russia, and the United States, have successfully shot down their own satellites to demonstrate their ASAT capabilities in a show of force. Because there's nothing more intimidating to your neighbor than a reckless willfulness to blow up your own things. Anyway, ASATs have also been used to remove decommissioned satellites that were getting in the way, so there was a practical use as well. Although this seemed to be rarer than the blowing up your own things parade that world governments smugly think is effective as a deterrent. What's interesting is that it gets another government to blow up their own satellite in retaliation, leaving everyone with smug smiles and fewer satellites. The development and design of anti-satellite weapons has followed a number of paths. The initial efforts by the United States and the Soviet Union used ground-launched missiles from the 1950s. However, many more exotic proposals came afterwards. In the late 1950s, the U.S. Air Force started a series of advanced strategic missile projects under the designation weapon system WS-199A. One of the projects studied under the 199A umbrella was Martin Bold's Orion Air-Launched Ballistic Missile, ALBM, for the B-47 Stratojet, based on the rocket motor from the Sergeant missile. 12 test launches were carried out between May 26, 1958 and October 13, 1959, but these were generally unsuccessful and further work on an ALBM ended. The system was then modified with an addition of an Altair upper stage to create an anti-satellite weapon with a 1,100-mile range. Only one test flight of the anti-satellite mission was carried out, making a mock attack on the Explorer 6 at an altitude of 156 miles. To record its flight path, the bold Orion transmitted telemetry to the ground, ejected flares to aid visual tracking, and was continuously tracked by radar. The missile successfully passed within 4 miles of the satellite, which, well, wasn't really all that great for hitting satellites. But this is where it gets relevant to what we were about to use. Another area of research was directed energy weapons, including a nuclear explosion-powered X-ray laser proposal developed at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, or LLNL, in 1968. Other research was based on more conventional lasers and developed to include the idea of a satellite with a fixed laser and a deployable mirror for targeting. LLNL continued to consider more edgy technology, but their X-ray laser system development was canceled in 1977. Although research into X-ray lasers was resurrected during the 1980s as part of the Strategic Defense Initiative. NASA and the U.S. military continued their joint development on energy weapons, with the thought being maybe if a satellite can defend itself with an energy weapon, maybe the world governments can stop blowing up their own satellites to teach the other countries a lesson. The weapon system on the Journeyman was a modified laser array for maximum protection against meteor storms and space debris. I also modified the display from an old retro arcade game called Tail Gunner, which I played as a child many, many times. Barry, our flight commander, was also familiar with it, and the heads-up display with the weapons tracking felt comfortable and intuitive, as Barry was also a gamer, which helped. I ordered Barry to basically fire at will, and he did. The meteors were being dispatched and broken up with no problem, and our laser array was making short work of the Meteor Storm. But that was when something even more interesting and unexpected happened. It appeared that we had caught the Meteor Storm by surprise, and after the first few meteors were destroyed, the rest of the storm seemed to hesitate for a moment, which was also curious. Then it appeared that the meteor storm backed off and headed back down to Mars, but it did so in such a way as to give the impression that it was their idea to do so, and it had nothing to do with the laser array breaking up the meteors. It reminded me a bit of a pot of our aloof dolphin friends, who when they appeared by your ship always wanted to let you know you were on their schedule, not yours. It was very odd and unusual behavior for a meteor storm, and there was obviously more going on here than a random cosmic event. But regardless, the way was clear, and it was time to prepare for landing. As the crew prepared for landing, Kara, our flight engineer, took me aside. She said she had a bit of a theory regarding the John Carter and their antimatter positronic propulsion system, and the odd behavior of the meteor storm may just confirm it. She said because the engine was still in the field test phase and was so powerful, it's possible they had overshot the landing site. Normally this may not be a big deal, as you would stay in orbit for another rotation and then try again. But if there's a targeted meteor storm interfering, then that's another story. The John Carter didn't have a modified Whipple shield, so they were more vulnerable to the meteor storm. Kara had calculated the John Carter's projected landing time and then extrapolated where in orbit it may be right now. And if she was correct, all we had to do was wait a few more hours and we may be able to assist with their landing. I saw where she was going with this. The Journeyman could be positioned as a shield to project the John Carter as it landed and protect it from the meteor storm that seemed to be taking everything very personally. So that basically meant we had a few more hours to wait if Kara's calculations were correct, and I believe they were. I thought I could use the extra time to check in on the crew. There were still some unresolved issues, and although they were minor, it wouldn't hurt to work on them as we waited for our possible rescue and landing window. I took a moment before I tackled some of these issues to enjoy the observation deck. It was the equivalent of walking the deck on the Recovery for me when we were on the ocean. It's calming, relaxing, and really gives you pause. Looking out into the vastness of space puts everything in perspective. I looked out the large observation window and just enjoyed the view. The stars twinkled, and I knew they were most likely millions of miles away, and the light was just getting to me now. When looking at stars that may be over 1 billion years old, it really puts your own problems in perspective. Now, granted, the ones you can see with the naked eye may only be 4,000 years old or more, but the older ones are out there, make no mistake, and only require a powerful telescope to observe. These stars were here before us, and will be here long after us, and we may never actually see them up close. Only their light that they sent out many years ago is visible to us. It's calming and humbling. I took a deep breath and just stared at the stars for a bit. I was here, in space, about to land on the surface of Mars, again. I have a pretty great job, I have to admit. Granted, there were quite a few mysteries I needed to untangle when I got there, but I had a strong feeling that they were not only all related, but they would all get sorted out eventually. We had the issue of terraforming Mars, how the Martians were open to it, including how King Targon and Queen Melanidia and the Martian Parliament felt about it, officially and unofficially. The missing Mars mission, the John Carter, which my son was also a part of. The mysterious surface ruins on the surface of Mars that the Martians insist aren't Martian. And Tom, the futurist from the future, who requested me personally for this mission. It was a lot, sure, but I was positive we'd get it figured out. But my main focus was, of course, finding my son. Anyway, I had taken enough time for reflection. It was time to check in on a few of the crew. My first stop was to see Dolores, our security officer / mercenary. She was going through one of her astrophobia modules with Bradley by her side. She had it under control, but mentioned that the NASA modules on astrophobia and space anxiety were proving to be extremely helpful to her, as I knew they would be. I was glad to see Dolores doing so well. She mentioned Mission Specialist Janet and the secret history her and Flight Commander Barry seemed to have. Dolores admitted she hadn't been able to quite get to the bottom of it, as both were very tight-lipped about it. However, she did offer an opinion which I found interesting. She said she thought that the uncomfortableness stemmed from a personal matter, not a professional one. I asked her how she knew that, and she smiled and said it was her job to know. She wasn't 100% sure, but honestly, if Dolores is leaning towards an opinion, it's best to pay attention. I found that insight interesting and admitted that it hadn't occurred to me that it may be something personal. But nevertheless, personal or professional, it was an issue and could cause problems later if not resolved. I thought it may be a good idea to talk to each of them individually so as to not make it even more uncomfortable. So I started with Janet. I asked her to meet me in the observation deck, as the bay window, like I said before, is always calming and can put people at ease. But I'll be honest, I didn't expect to get very far with Janet. She was a NASA mission specialist, and keeping secrets was kind of part of her job. I mean, I still didn't even know what part of this mission she was even specializing in yet. She was finally forthcoming with some information, but I was certain there was more to the story that she was carefully omitting. I had, of course, set out a nice platter of tea and scones, and Janet appreciated that. It reminded her of the White Dwarf Cafe on top of the JPL rocket gantry, where she spent a lot of time. She asked what was on my mind, but the way she asked it gave me the impression that she wasn't going to volunteer any more information than she already had. Well, I'll give her credit. She was good at her job, no doubt. I just came out and asked her, what was her history with Barry, our flight commander? I think the question caught her a little off guard. And it's hard to catch a mission specialist off guard, but I think I did so. Clearly, she did not hide her history with Barry as well as she thought she did. She stammered for a moment, not wanting to lie, and not wanting to tell me the whole story either. Just then, Barry walked into the observatory. He knew what these interviews were about and understood why I wanted to do them separately. However, he thought it would save some time if we just did them all together. I said that was fine with me if it was fine with them. Very well, I asked them both. What was their history together? They looked at each other a bit sheepishly and blushed. That's when I knew Dolores was right. This was a personal matter, not a professional one. Janet started by assuring me that their history would not affect their performance, and Barry agreed. But since the cat was most assuredly out of the space bag at this point, they agreed to tell me about their history together. It was a long time ago, and it had nothing to do with science or NASA, ironically. I had mentioned before Barry used to be a television writer in Hollywood until sanity got the better of him, and he decided to chart a course for his second act through space. He knew it would take a while, but he was up for the challenge. Obviously, it had worked out beautifully for him. And from living in Los Angeles, I know that Hollywood is a bizarre and irrational place, and could see that being a sitcom writer who was just successful enough to not worry about being fired every day, or maybe being an actor famous enough to have your headshot in a local dry cleaner, all of it can be so enticing. So I understood the shiny allure of it all. Turns out Barry wasn't the only one enticed by the sweet allure of Hollywood. Janet, unexpectedly, was also caught up in the bright stage lights of a career in show business. She said they had met at a typical Hollywood party with writers, actors, directors, producers, musicians, circus clowns, and pharmacists. Janet, and this is where she became a little embarrassed, was studying to become a magician. She had everything from a marked deck of cards to a closet full of medallions and capes, and was eager to learn. I stopped for a moment and thought for a second. There are always surprises on an adventure. Now, I was happy that we didn't have another hidden pirate on this adventure. I did find it interesting, however, that we had a hidden magician. However, that was far less problematic and didn't trouble me at all. Anyway, I waited for Janet to continue. She took a deep breath and then told me that she and Barry locked eyes from across the room at the party and were instantly smitten with each other. Barry carefully walked past a juggler and a crying production assistant and introduced himself. He and Janet instantly hit it off, and Janet told him all about the Magic Castle, which was a dream of hers to belong. She had just been accepted and was celebrating at the party, wearing her finest medallion. You see, the Magic Castle is a clubhouse for magicians and magic enthusiasts, as well as the clubhouse for the Academy of Magical Arts. It is in the Hollywood district of Los Angeles, California, and it bills itself as the most unusual private club in the world. The Magic Castle features magic shows and historic displays, as well as a full-service dining room and numerous bars. Only Magic Castle members and their guests are allowed entrance, although courtesy invitations can be obtained. The atmosphere is reminiscent of classic nightclub days, and a strict dress code is enforced. Once a private residence, the castle was declared a Los Angeles Historical Cultural Monument in 1989. Many celebrities have performed at the Magic Castle, including Orson Welles, Johnny Carson, Steve Martin, and Neil Patrick Harris. One of the castle's most memorable performers was Di Vernon, an expert in sleight of hand. Interestingly, the lobby of the castle has no visible doors to the interior, and visitors must say a secret phrase to a sculpture of an owl to gain access, exposing the entrance to the club. 5 magic performances are showcased each night, spread across 3 theaters: the Close-Up Gallery, the Parlor of Prestidigitation, and a large stage in the Palace of Mystery. On weekends, additional performances are added in the Peller Theater, as well as the Hat and Hare Pub and W.C. Fields Bar. Informal performance areas near the 5 bars give magician members the space for impromptu magic for guests and other patrons. In the music room, a piano is played by Invisible Irma, the castle's resident ghost, who takes musical requests. In addition, there are regular Houdini seances at the castle in the Houdini Seance Room, conducted by Leo Kostka, Rob Zabrecki, or Misty Lee. The club is said to be haunted by the ghost of Houdini, especially in the press releases, of course. I have to say I found all of that very interesting and a little surprising. Now that I knew their history, I knew there was nothing to worry about. It was a long time ago, and I could see that they had put it all behind them. However, I did think there may be some lingering feelings towards each other that neither of them seemed to want to acknowledge, but I didn't think that would affect the mission. Suddenly, Kara, our flight engineer, hurriedly ran into the observation deck and said it was time. Turns out her calculations were correct, and with a big smile told me to look out the bay window. I could see why she was smiling. Indeed, our patience had paid off. Just outside our ship near the landing zone was the John Carter, and just hovering over both of us was the impossibly personal Meteor Storm. We were one step closer to solving these mysteries with the John Carter right in front of us. Their communications array must have been damaged, as I suspected, since no one had heard from them since they lost contact with NASA. But they clearly must see us through their own observation deck the way we were viewing them. The wild card seemed to be the Meteor Storm, which seemed to be hovering over both of us, which was extremely unusual as well. I quickly formulated a theory based on these observations. I told Barry to move us in closer to the Meteor Storm and prep our weapons array. He did so. And as I suspected, the Meteor Storm backed off. The John Carter must have noticed this too. It was clear that John Carter had run afoul of the seemingly sentient Meteor Storm, and had prevented them from landing in addition to knocking out their communications array. But I think Kara was also correct in that the experimental positronic antimatter propulsion system also overshot the landing zone at first. But once they got the attention of the Meteor Storm, they never got another chance to land. Now that we were here, we could help with that. I saw Barry position the Journeyman in between the John Carter and the Meteor Storm. As suspected, the Meteor Storm tried to go around us to get the John Carter, but we would not let it. Barry's excellent flight skills prevented the Meteor Storm from passing us, and it kept its distance, knowing about our weapons array. The crew of the John Carter must have been observing out their window and clearly got the message, as they soon landed safely. We followed and landed right next to them, and the Meteor Storm kept its distance. But interestingly, once we had both landed, the Meteor Storm seemed to lose interest and just wandered off nonchalantly, which is something you wouldn't think a Meteor Storm could pull off, but it did. I told the crew to prepare for disembarkment, and I was sure the John Carter's crew was doing the same. And I will tell you all about our arrival on Mars and meeting up with the crew of the John Carter, including my son, next time. But first, I want to tell you about something. Sometimes, in all our lives, you hit an unexpected problem, like a sentient meteor storm, and you can get a little tunnel vision about it. You think that problem is solely yours and yours alone. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. It didn't occur to me right away that the meteor storm was also the John Carter's problem. And sometimes the problem is so big it's a problem for everyone, and not everyone is equipped to deal with it. So sometimes when you deal with your problem, you're also dealing with someone else's problem, either in the present or possibly the past or future. So it's another great reason not to avoid problems, but face them head on. Problems like it when you avoid them. It gives them a chance to grow and then bother other people. And before you know it, they're everywhere. So it's our duty to keep the problem population in check and eliminate them whenever we can. Not only will you improve things for yourself, someone you've never met before may appreciate it as well. Good night, adventurers.
The Quiet Journeys of Professor Atwood was created, written, and performed by Chris Mancini and produced by White Cat Entertainment. It is a work of fiction. Maybe. Music and sound design by Ron Tansky at rontanskymusic.com. For more info and merchandise, including t-shirts, mugs, and blankets, go to whitecatentertainment.com.